1932. Selfridge Field, Michigan. A cold autumn morning that would haunt a young man for years. Clarence Leonard Johnson stood before the Army Air Corps Recruitment Board, his application clutched in calloused hands. 22 years old, brilliant beyond measure, desperate to serve his country as an aviation engineer. The son of Swedish immigrants, raised in the grim poverty of Michigan's Upper Peninsula mining country, he had clawed his way through the University of Michigan on scholarships and sheer determination. The board's decision was swift and merciless. Rejected. Not for lack of qualifications, his academic record blazed with excellence. Not for lack of passion, aviation consumed him with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The reasons were never fully explained, lost in the bureaucratic machinery of military recruitment during the Depression. Perhaps his immigrant background, perhaps his lack of social connections, perhaps simple bad luck in a year when the Army had more applicants than positions. Whatever the reason, the rejection burned like acid. Years later, after he had transformed American aviation and revolutionized aerospace engineering, Kelly Johnson, he would adopt the nickname to Americanize his Swedish given name, would still remember that morning at Selfridge Field. The humiliation, the crushing sense of doors slamming shut, the bitter irony that the institution he desperately wanted to serve had deemed him unworthy. But rejection, it turned out, was exactly what he needed. Kelly had been born February 27, 1910 in Ishpeming, Michigan, a hardscrabble mining town where winter arrived in October and didn't leave until May. His father, Peter Johnson, worked underground in the iron mines, emerging each day coated in red dust, his lungs gradually failing from the work that fed his family. His mother, Christine, stretched every penny, every scrap of food, keeping 6 children fed during years when the mines shut down and there was no work at all. Money was scarce, opportunity was scarcer. But young Clarence possessed something money couldn't buy, an analytical mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos, solutions where others saw only problems. At age 12, he built his first aircraft, a glider constructed from scrap wood and canvas. It didn't fly far. It crashed spectacularly, in fact, earning him the nickname Kelly from schoolmates who mockingly compared him to a comic strip character. But he learned from every failure, refined every design, pushed every boundary. The University of Michigan accepted him in 1928 with a scholarship that covered tuition but nothing else. He worked construction jobs in summer, washed dishes during the school year, lived on the edge of hunger, and graduated near the top of his class in aeronautical engineering. 4 years of relentless work, 4 years of proving himself against students from wealthy families with every advantage. And then the Army Air Corps rejected him. Standing outside Selfridge Field that autumn day, watching aircraft take off and land, Kelly Johnson made a decision that would echo through aviation history. If the military wouldn't have him, he would prove them wrong. He would design aircraft so revolutionary, so superior, so absolutely necessary that they would beg for his services. Rejection would become his fuel. Within months, he would join a struggling California aircraft company called Lockheed. Within a decade, he would be their chief engineer. Within 15 years, he would design the aircraft that would help win World War II and vindicate every doubt, every rejection, every door slammed in his face. But in 1932, standing outside that airfield, watching planes he couldn't fly and couldn't help design, Kelly Johnson was just another unemployed graduate in Depression-era America. Another immigrant's son with a fancy diploma and no prospects. Another dreamer who had been told his dreams weren't good enough. The Army Air Corps had made their decision. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. 1933, Burbank, California. The Lockheed Aircraft Corporation occupied a modest facility that looked more like an oversized garage than the birthplace of aviation history. Kelly Johnson arrived with $12 in his pocket, a suitcase full of worn clothes, and a toolbox containing drafting instruments he'd protected more carefully than his own body during the cross-country journey from Michigan. The company was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, a victim of the Depression that had devastated the American aircraft industry. Airlines weren't buying planes. The military had no budget. Lockheed was hemorrhaging money and laying off workers weekly. They hired Kelly for 83 cents an hour, less than skilled factory workers made, to work as a tool designer. Not an engineer, a tool designer. He didn't care. He was inside an aircraft company. He was learning, and he was watching. Within weeks, Kelly's analytical mind had identified inefficiencies in Lockheed's manufacturing processes that senior engineers had overlooked for years. Within months, he was making suggestions, politely, carefully, always backed by calculations and wind tunnel data about how to improve aircraft performance. His supervisors found him brilliant and infuriating in equal measure. The breakthrough came with the Lockheed Model 10 Electra, a twin-engine transport aircraft the company desperately needed to succeed. The Electra was Lockheed's bet-the-company design, intended to compete with Douglas and Boeing for airline contracts that could save the struggling manufacturer. During wind tunnel testing, Kelly noticed something that would have escaped less observant engineers. The Electra's tail exhibited dangerous instability at certain angles of attack. The buffeting was subtle, easy to dismiss as normal turbulence, but Kelly's calculations predicted it would become catastrophic in real-world flight conditions. He was 23 years old, less than 2 years out of college, the newest and lowest-ranking engineer in the department. He told his supervisors the Electra would kill someone if they didn't redesign the tail. The senior engineers were not pleased. Hall Hibbard, Lockheed's chief engineer, had designed the Electra. He had decades of experience. This immigrant kid with barely 2 years at the company was claiming his design was fatally flawed. Kelly presented his wind tunnel data, his stress calculations, his mathematical models. He showed them the aerodynamic principles they had missed. He demonstrated, with the calm confidence of someone who knew he was right, exactly why the current design would fail and exactly how to fix it. Chief Engineer Hall Hibbard later recalled, "I wanted to fire him on the spot. This kid barely old enough to shave, telling me my design was wrong. But then I looked at his numbers. Damn it, his numbers were right. Everything checked out. The math was perfect. I had to choose between my ego and the truth. I chose the truth. Best decision I ever made." Lockheed redesigned the Electra's empennage, the tail assembly following Kelly's recommendations. The twin vertical stabilizers were enlarged, repositioned, and strengthened according to his calculations. The modified Electra flew beautifully, sold successfully, and probably saved Lockheed from bankruptcy. More importantly, it established Kelly Johnson's reputation. The kid who wasn't afraid to challenge authority when the math demanded it. The engineer who cared more about being right than being liked. The problem solver who saw solutions where experienced designers saw only insurmountable obstacles. Hall Hibbard, instead of firing the upstart young engineer, became his mentor and champion. Kelly was promoted to aeronautical engineer. Finally, the title matched his capabilities and assigned to increasingly challenging projects. With each project, his reputation grew. But more importantly, he was forming ideas about how engineering should work. Revolutionary concepts that would eventually transform the entire aerospace industry. And then, in February 1937, the Army Air Corps issued a specification that most engineers considered impossible to meet. Kelly Johnson saw it differently. He saw opportunity. He saw opportunity. June 23, 1937. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The Army Air Corps Material Division opened sealed proposals from America's leading aircraft manufacturers, each offering their solution to the impossible interceptor specification. The requirements were brutal. Speed over 360 miles per hour, climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. Range exceeding 1,000 miles. Heavy armament. High-altitude performance. No single-engine fighter could meet all these demands. The laws of physics and the limitations of 1937 technology made it impossible. Unless you were willing to think differently. Kelly Johnson studied the requirements and saw what other engineers missed. You couldn't meet these specifications with conventional design. A single engine powerful enough would be too heavy, too unreliable, too fuel-hungry. But 2 engines, 2 smaller, proven engines, could deliver the combined power needed, while providing redundancy and reliability. The problem was where to put them. Kelly's solution was radical and unprecedented. He would mount 2 Allison V1710 liquid-cooled V12 engines in twin booms. extending back from the wings. The booms would also house the landing gear and support twin-tail surfaces. The pilot and armament would sit in a central nacelle, a sleek, streamlined pod between the booms. The propellers would counter-rotate to eliminate torque effects. The configuration looked bizarre, alien, like something from science fiction rather than practical aeronautical engineering. Lockheed's senior management thought Kelly had lost his mind. Robert Gross, Lockheed's president, stared at the initial sketches. "It looks like a pterodactyl had sex with a machine gun. Are you sure this thing will fly?" Kelly was sure. The math said it would fly. The wind tunnel data confirmed it. But the real genius was in the details. All armament concentrated in the nose, 4 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, and 1 Hispano-Suiza HS 404 20mm autocannon. No convergence issues, no wing flex affecting aim. Where the pilot pointed, the bullets went. The tricycle landing gear was revolutionary for American fighters in 1937. Most fighters used tail-dragger configurations that required delicate handling. Kelly's design would provide better visibility and easier ground handling. On June 23, 1937, the Army Air Corps awarded Lockheed a contract for a prototype. Kelly had 9 months to prove his radical design wasn't just theoretical brilliance, but practical reality. The challenges were immense. No one had ever built a fighter with twin booms. The structural engineering required to connect the booms to the center nacelle while maintaining strength and minimizing weight pushed the limits of materials science. Kelly worked 18-hour days, sleeping in the drafting room, personally supervising every critical component. He checked tolerances with micrometers, rejected parts that didn't meet his exacting standards. Hall Hibbard watched his protege. Kelly didn't just design the aircraft, he lived it. Every rivet, every cable, every square inch was his personal responsibility. He measured 5 times before cutting once. By January 1939, the prototype designated XP-38 was ready. January 27, 1939. March Field, California. The XP-38 sat on the runway, its twin booms and distinctive silhouette gleaming in morning sunlight. Lieutenant Ben Kelsey climbed into the cockpit. The twin Allisons rumbled to life with a distinctive sound, counter-rotating propellers spinning in opposite directions. At 90 miles per hour, the aircraft lifted cleanly into the California sky. It flew beautifully, stable, responsive, powerful. The bizarre twin-boom configuration proved aerodynamically sound. The Army Air Corps immediately ordered evaluation aircraft. By September 1939, with war erupting in Europe, orders expanded. By 1941, they were ordering hundreds. The aircraft received its official designation, P-38 Lightning. Kelly Johnson's rejected application to the Army Air Corps had led him to design the aircraft the Army now desperately needed. The institution that hadn't wanted him as an engineer now depended on his engineering genius. The fork-tailed devil was about to go to war. And one mission, one impossible interception over the South Pacific, would prove that Kelly's radical design could change the course of history. August 1942, RF Bovingdon, England. The first Lockheed P-38 Lightnings arrived in the European theater of operations, and German Luftwaffe pilots were about to encounter something they had never seen before. The Lightning was unlike anything flying over Europe. British Spitfires and Hurricanes were elegant single-engine fighters. German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf F-190s were similarly conventional. Then came the Lightning with its twin booms, twin engines, and ungodly speed. Major Cass Hoff, one of the first American pilots to fly Lightnings in combat over North Africa. The first time we engaged German fighters, they didn't know what to make of us. We'd dive out of altitude, hit 450 miles per hour, make one pass with those nose guns, and we'd be 5 miles away before they could react. We weren't dogfighting. We were hit-and-run artists. The Lightning's concentrated nose armament proved devastatingly effective. 450 caliber Browning M2 machine guns and 120mm Hispano-Suiza cannon all fired along the aircraft's center line. No convergence point to calculate, no wing flex to account for. Where the pilot aimed, the the bullets went. At typical combat ranges of 300 to 500 yards, a 2-second burst put approximately 150 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and 30 rounds of 20mm explosive shells into a target area roughly 3 feet in diameter. The effect on enemy aircraft was catastrophic. But the Lightning had problems. The compressibility issue became deadly in combat. When pilots pushed into high-speed dives, they encountered buffeting and control stiffness. At speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, controls locked up. Pilots found themselves in uncontrollable dives, unable to pull out. Several pilots died before Kelly's team designed dive recovery flaps, small surfaces that deployed automatically when the aircraft exceeded safe speeds. The modification was designed, tested, and implemented in months. Captain Arthur Hayden, 1st Fighter Group, experienced engine failure during a bomber escort mission over Germany in January 1943. My left engine lost power at 28,000 feet. 2 FD-190s spotted me and came in for the kill. I firewalled the right engine and dove. The Lightning could outdive anything the Germans had, even on non-engine. I hit 500 miles per hour and got away. The speed saved my life. The twin-engine configuration provided redundancy that saved countless lives. Pilots could lose an engine and still fly home. Single-engine fighters offered no such margin. The range was revolutionary. With internal fuel and drop tanks, a Lightning could escort bombers deep into Germany and still have fuel for combat and return. German pilots developed grudging respect for the twin-boomed American fighter. They nicknamed it Der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. Luftwaffe Oberleutnant Franz Stiegler wrote in his diary, "The American Lockheed fighter is formidable. It does not turn well. Our Messerschmitts can outturn it easily. But it climbs like a rocket, dives like a meteor, and those nose guns are deadly accurate." The smart American pilots use altitude and speed, hit hard and disappear. We have learned to respect the fork-tailed devil. By early 1943, over 1,500 P-38s had been delivered to Army Air Forces units worldwide. They flew bomber escort over Germany, reconnaissance missions over occupied Europe, ground attack in North Africa and Italy. But the Lightning's greatest moment was still ahead. A single mission in the South Pacific would prove that Kelly Johnson's radical design could accomplish the impossible and change the course of the Pacific War. That Kelly Johnson's radical design could accomplish the impossible. April 18, 1943, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Henderson Field. 18 P-38 Lightnings sat on the coral runway in pre-dawn darkness. Each carried 2 165-gallon drop tanks, maximum fuel for maximum range. The target was not a military installation. The target was one man, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, architect of Pearl Harbor, Japan's greatest naval strategist. American intelligence had intercepted Yamamoto's flight plan. He would fly from Rabaul to Bougainville in a Mitsubishi G4M bomber escorted by 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters. The interception point was 435 miles from Henderson Field, far beyond the range of any fighter except the Lightning. The mission required perfect navigation across featureless ocean, precise timing, and the Lightning's unmatched range. At 0710 hours, 18 Lightnings thundered down the runway and headed northwest. For nearly 3 hours, they flew 50 feet above the ocean, maintaining radio silence, trusting navigation completely. At 0943 hours, they spotted 2 Betty bombers and 6 Zero escorts. Exactly as predicted. The engagement was brief and violent. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber attacked the bombers while covering fighters engaged the Zeros. Yamamoto's aircraft crashed into the Bougainville jungle at 0945 hours. The admiral was killed. Japan had lost its greatest naval strategist. The Lightning had accomplished a mission no other aircraft could attempt. The fork-tailed devil had just changed history. June 1943. Burbank, California. Kelly Johnson received an urgent summons from the Army Air Forces that would transform not just his career, but the entire future of aerospace engineering. The military needed a jet fighter, America's first operational jet-powered combat aircraft, and they needed it impossibly fast. German Messerschmitt Me-262 jets had been spotted in testing. Intelligence reports suggested operational deployment was imminent. The United States was falling behind in the jet race, and falling behind meant losing air superiority. The specifications were brutal. Design, build, and fly a prototype jet fighter in 180 days. 6 months from blank paper to flying aircraft. Most aircraft programs took 3 to 5 years. The Army was asking for the impossible. Again. Kelly studied the requirements and did what he always did when faced with impossible deadlines. He threw out the rule book. Traditional aircraft development followed rigid procedures. Design teams drafted plans that went to review committees. Committees made recommendations that went to management. Management made decisions that went to engineering. Engineering created drawings that went to manufacturing. Each step had multiple approval layers, documentation requirements, review processes. The system was thorough, careful, and slow as molasses. Kelly proposed something radical: a small team with total authority, minimal bureaucracy, maximum autonomy, and direct communication between everyone involved. Engineers would work alongside mechanics. Designers would talk directly to the people building the aircraft. Decisions would be made in hours, not weeks. Lockheed management, desperate to meet the Army's deadline, gave Kelly unprecedented freedom. He handpicked 23 engineers and 105 shop mechanics, the best people he knew, regardless of seniority or politics. He set them up in a rented circus tent next to the Burbank airport, right beside a plastics factory that produced such noxious odors that workers joked about the smell. One engineer, referencing the Lil Abner comic strip Skunk Works, a moonshine factory producing foul-smelling Kickapoo joy juice, suggested they call themselves the Skunk Works. The name stuck, though it was later changed to Skunk Works to avoid trademark issues. The Skunk Works was born. Kelly established revolutionary principles. The manager must have complete control with minimal interference. Use small teams of excellent people. Keep paperwork simple with flexibility for changes. Minimize reports but record important work thoroughly. The philosophy: trust talented people, eliminate bureaucracy, make decisions fast, fix problems immediately. Keep teams small enough that everyone knows everyone else's name. Irving Culver, one of Kelly's original Skunk Works engineers. In the main division, changing a bolt specification required forms, signatures, committee review. At Skunk Works, I could walk 10 feet to Kelly's desk, show him the problem, get a decision in 30 seconds, have the change implemented by afternoon. It was chaos by corporate standards. It was genius by results. The project was the XP-80 Shooting Star. Kelly designed around a single British de Havilland Goblin turbojet engine, the only jet engine available in time. The design was conservative: straight wings, tricycle gear, simple fuselage, because revolutionary propulsion required conservative airframe design. The Skunk Works operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Kelly worked alongside his team, sleeping on a cot in the corner, waking to solve problems, collapsing again for a few hours before repeating the cycle. When design problems emerged, the engineer walked over to the mechanic building that component. They discussed solutions. Kelly decided. Work continued within minutes. No committees, no delays, no bureaucracy. 143 days after starting, 37 days ahead of the already impossible deadline, the XP-80 Shooting Star rolled out. Test pilot Milo Burcham conducted the first flight on January 8, 1944. The aircraft flew perfectly. No major problems, no significant modifications required. Colonel Marcus Cooper, Air Material Command Liaison, wrote in his official report, "Lockheed's Skunk Works has demonstrated that unorthodox management methods can produce orthodox results faster and cheaper than traditional approaches." What they accomplished in 143 days should have been impossible. Every aerospace company should study this program. The Skunk Works methodology would produce some of aviation history's most legendary aircraft: the U-2 Dragon Lady, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 Nighthawk. Each represented a quantum leap in technology. Each was developed using Kelly's principles. The rejection Kelly had suffered in 1932 had shaped his approach. He had been dismissed by bureaucracy, rejected by institutional thinking. So he built a system that eliminated bureaucracy, that valued results over credentials, that gave talented people freedom to prove themselves. The Skunk Works was Kelly Johnson's answer to every committee that had ever doubted him. And it worked spectacularly. The decades following World War II would prove that Kelly Johnson's genius extended far beyond a single revolutionary aircraft. The Skunk Works methodology he created would produce a succession of legendary aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what was technologically possible. Each design bore Kelly's fingerprints, not just in technical innovation, but in the management philosophy that made impossible projects reality. The U-2 Dragon Lady arrived in 1955, a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft designed to fly over 70,000 feet, altitudes where no interceptor could reach, where the curvature of the Earth became visible, where pilots wore pressure suits like astronauts. The U-2 was Kelly's answer to Cold War intelligence requirements. The Central Intelligence Agency needed photographs of Soviet military installations, nuclear facilities, missile sites hidden behind the Iron Curtain. Satellite technology didn't exist yet. The only option was manned reconnaissance flying at altitudes beyond the reach of Soviet air defenses. Kelly designed an aircraft that was more glider than fighter, long, slender wings spanning over 80 feet, a single Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojet engine, a fuselage so cramped the pilot could barely move. The U-2 was unstable, difficult to fly, physically exhausting for pilots who flew missions lasting over 10 hours at altitude. But it worked. U-2 missions over the Soviet Union provided intelligence that shaped American Cold War strategy for decades. Even after France's Gary Powers was shot down over Sverdlovsk in 1960, the U-2 continued serving. Modified versions still fly today, over 70 years after Kelly's initial design, providing reconnaissance over Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones. Then came the SR-71 Blackbird in 1964, the pinnacle of Kelly Johnson's career, the most extraordinary aircraft ever built. The specifications seemed impossible even by Kelly's standards. Mach 3 plus sustained cruise speed over 2,000 miles per hour, operational altitude exceeding 85,000 feet, range of over 3,000 miles, capability to photograph 100,000 square miles of Earth's surface per hour. The Blackbird was constructed primarily from titanium, a metal so difficult to work with that Kelly's team had to invent new manufacturing processes. The aircraft leaked fuel on the ground because the titanium panels only sealed properly when heated by air friction at Mach 3. The engines were technological marvels that operated as turbojets at low speed and ramjets at high speed. Colonel Richard Graham, SR-71 pilot, described flying the Blackbird at Mach 3.2 at 80,000 feet. You're covering 1 mile every 1.8 seconds. Surface-to-air missiles are launched at you. You watch them on radar, accelerate slightly, and simply outrun them. No aircraft before or since has matched the Blackbird's performance. It's Kelly Johnson's masterpiece. The Blackbird was never shot down despite numerous attempts. It set speed records that still stand decades after retirement. It represented the absolute pinnacle of what could be achieved with conventional aircraft technology. The F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter arrived in 1981, developed under Kelly's successor Ben Rich, but based on principles Kelly established, the world's first operational stealth aircraft with radar-evading faceted surfaces that made it nearly invisible to enemy defenses. The F-117's angular faceted shape looked alien, a flying geometric nightmare that shouldn't be aerodynamically stable. But it worked because Kelly's Skunk Works methodology allowed engineers to solve problems that conventional programs couldn't address. The Nighthawk proved its worth during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, striking high-value targets in Baghdad while conventional aircraft faced deadly air defenses.